All right. I am now joined by Victor Bruzzone and Ethan from Confronting Capital. They're also both from the academic Edgelords podcast, along with our friends Matt McManus and Gordon Katic. So everybody should check that out. Yeah, I have. I know this is weird timing because we're counter programming. I believe the president right now, but whatever. This is the time we can do it. So if he announces that we're invading Iran or something, we'll pause to note that. But otherwise, we'll just go ahead as planned.
What's going on? Is it like the State of the Union, or is it something else?
No, it's something else. Yeah, he announced earlier. So yeah, the address sets the so New York Times they says the address sets the stage for President Biden's planned request to Congress for tens of billions in emergency assistance for Israel and Ukraine. So I think it's just that he's asking for a lot of money because we're at this point funding two significant wars at the same time, and it's already like. I saw there have already been some awkward headlines about artillery that was earmarked for Ukraine being sent to Israel instead and stuff like that, right? So I think that's why he wants the big infusion of cash right now to be able to continue to cover both at once. Although obviously that's like kind of gallows humor about the Iran thing, but that's not really out of the question right now.
I feel like I'm so behind the news cycle. Is there actually news that the evidence that Iran was involved?
No, there's not. But yeah, so far, or if there is, I haven't seen it. I mean, so far, everything I've seen has been that actually, lots of people have said that, but it doesn't seem like U.S. or even Israeli government sources have been rushing to say, yes, that's definitely true. But I think the more worrying thing is just that the Hezbollah angle, that the Israelis have been clashing more with them, and that if that if Hezbollah, which is already an Iranian proxy, got more directly involved, then what would that mean about Iran? What would that mean about the United States? But as far as I know, there's no actual, developments to that beyond just kind of what's generally been going on the last couple of days.
Yeah, I think I saw on 60 Minutes they interviewed President Biden, I guess, on last week's episode, which would have been Sunday, but who knows when they actually interviewed him.
Mm-hmm.
And he, I think he specifically said there was no evidence of Iran's involvement to a question, but who knows?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I don't think anybody's, well, I mean, lots of people are, but those are congressmen and stuff like that, right? I don't think anybody in the executive branch is saying that there is, or for that matter, even Israel. All right, let's see. So I want to get started pretty quickly here because we're trying hard to keep it down to 3 hours, including the post game, and I actually just as an incentive for good behavior, I only booked the studio for that time tonight. So
oh, nice.
So we do need to get started.
Yeah, let's do it.
Quick thing before we do, I should say for anybody who is in Southern California and feels like coming out on Sunday, so in 3 days, at the Moroccan Lounge in Los Angeles, I'm going to be debating this guy, Siaka Massaquoi, who is a PragerU and Babylon Bee contributor, and he's the vice chair of the Los Angeles GOP. So that should be fun. That's Sunday night, Moroccan Lounge, doors at 6:30, debates at 7. Haven't gotten the plug out of the way. There's a link, of course, in the description for the stream. But let's get right to it. So this is a 2015 debate that we're watching from the Cambridge Union on the motion, this House believes Israel is a rogue state. There are a bunch of people who are going to be speaking. That's how these Cambridge Union and Oxford Union debates work. But so there's people like the president of the board of directors, it's like the board of deputies of British Jews, I think is the name of the organization, right? That's who's one of the speakers on the no side. The speaker, of course, I think that's going to make the most people in our audience perk up their ears is our friend and several times past guest on the show, Norman Finkelstein, who is, of course, speaking on the yes side. But yeah, let us get right to it. All right.
I'm getting like no volume. I don't know if that's
Yeah. This is an annoying thing sometimes, but let me make sure it's all the way jacked up here. We've also got a Chrome extension.
Oh yeah. Well, in the meantime, I will just say it's funny. Norm Finkelstein. I think I was not aware of him, and I just randomly saw he was on Bree's podcast, and I was like out on a long bike ride, and I was listening. I'd never seen him. For some reason, just from like his voice, I thought he was like in his 80s. I was like, oh man, this guy sounds. And then when I like looked him up, because I was like, oh, this guy was fun. I mean, he also maybe in that episode too. I feel like I agreed with a lot of what he was saying, but I feel like he came off like a little like, oh, get off my lawn kind of.
Yeah, it's
I think the episode was specifically about the scandal of like what's his name? The How to Be an Anti-Racist guy, like how his
Kendi.
Yeah, and he was just, I don't know. He was, I agreed with a lot of his critiques, but he was just like going off and like a super like what seemed like just his voice, the combination. I was like, this guy's probably just like a really old man. And then I like saw him and I was like, okay, he's like not that old, so it's just funny.
Yeah, man.
He gave off that vibe.
Man overflows with personality, but
definitely.
Let's see if the volume's any better now.
All right. Doesn't sound like it, but we'll see.
Okay, how still really bad?
Yeah, it's just static now.
I don't hear static. I hear like muffled. It's like barely, like you can barely hear it, but you can hear like a little bit of like Adults from Charlie Brown type audio.
Yeah, exactly. That's even quiet. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hearing normal audio, but I'm hearing it faint. So let me see if I can figure out what's going on here.
Sure.
All right. Let's see.
Ethan, do you know Norman Finkelstein much? Were you familiar with his stuff?
Oh yeah, I'm very familiar with Norman Finkelstein. I thought I read one of his books when I was reading through the Israel-Palestine stuff. He has this book called Image and Reality. It's one of the best books I've read about the conflict.
Oh, cool. Cool.
Yeah, he seems like he spends like the lion's share of his time talking about Israel-Palestine. Like that's his kind of number one issue.
Yeah, and then I guess he also just wrote a book that was kind of a takedown of the Ibram X. Kendi's types or whatever, and that's what he was talking to Bree about, at least Bree Joy Gray or whatever. Yeah.
I thought his latest book was a bit like a broader kind of critique of like kind of woke culture, like cancel culture. Yeah.
Yeah. It's I'll burn this bridge when I come to it is yeah, I mean that's his I think that there are like certain things that he's doing in it that are not unlike canceling comedians while the world burns, but it's like I'm definitely but like it's definitely if I'm if I'm applying a scalpel, Norm's definitely the flamethrower version.
Speaking of which, I actually had an example from your book in my dissertation, in my like final chapter. I was talking about the DSA meeting and I was quoting like some of the ways that you describe it. Cause I mean, without getting in the weeds, I was just kind of talking about activist movements and how they can go wrong sometimes a little bit. And my supervisor actually had a meeting with her this morning, and she was just telling me, she's like, I don't know if that part should stay in there. She's like, you just sound really unsympathetic to them. And I was like,
oh no.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just the way it's framed, but I don't know. I'm gonna see. I kind of want to keep it in, but we'll see.
Yeah. Oh, fair enough. Well, I hope they do. Hope they do let you do that.
I think I just need to add more about like what I mean by kind of solidarity when it goes badly and when it works well. And I think just my explanation before it made it sound like I was using it as a more weaponized example than like an example of something more nuanced. But
speaking of Norm, I think we could plausibly talk about the Holocaust industry on the Edgelord podcast. That was a pretty edgy book. Yeah.
What's that about?
So Finkelstein, like, as you might guess from the name, like he himself is Jewish and he had like a lot of family who died. Yeah, he had a lot of family who died in the Holocaust and stuff. So, he's obviously not like a Holocaust denier or anything like that, but he wrote this book where he basically argues that like, like a lot of people, and particularly people who are like Israel sympathetic and so on, have kind of like weaponized the Holocaust as a way to like make discussion less productive, etc.
Ooh, that does sound edgy.
Yeah. No, his if you've ever seen probably the most famous short clip of Norm talking about this stuff at the in like the Q&A at a university event, I mean, like he says, he spells it out in that clip, right, that his parents were both death camp survivors and were at the Warsaw Ghetto, so that this is something he grew up kind of surrounded with, and this is and this is kind of what he's bringing to his particular objections to to the way he sees that experience being weaponized to support all kinds of things that he doesn't now. All right.
So how are we doing on the audio? I love this audio situation. It's making it more and more likely for that like we're gonna get to finish.
I know, right?
It's like every second it's really working for us. What we could do too is just commit to doing a two-parter as well, and just like that way we could just be as slow and meticulous as we want.
That's true too. We could do that. Let me try. Okay, so let me make another attempt here. See if any of that made any difference. I was also trying to look for another video while we're talking, but I cannot find another video of this. So let's see if just changing the audio setting manually does anything.
Damn, that's so weird. I feel like I even just checked the YouTube video before we came on, and like it had normal audio, and so it's weird. I don't know. I wonder what's going on.
Okay. So I take it because like whatever you're hearing, I'm not hearing, right? So I take it on your end, it's really bad.
Well, what are you? Does it sound totally normal to you?
It sounds a little soft, but that's the only thing that's not normal about it.
And is it normal for the audience too? I'm curious if they can hear it fine as well. I wonder if I need to change my settings or something.
Well, Ethan, how does it sound to you?
It sounds, it sounds like I can barely hear it. And yeah, it's like kind of what I can hear sounds a bit distorted as well.
Okay, let's see. What else? Are there other settings that I'm not, that I could be missing here? That got the volume booster extension up for whatever good that's doing.
What about just like closing down YouTube, closing down the browser, restarting it? Or I guess you can't do that because then we would cut off the stream. But
no, I can. I've had like power go off before and stuff. So if you guys want to hold down the fort for a second, I can try that. See if it does anything.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Also, I think it's funny that somebody in chat said, love Norm. He's got a lot of stuff. He's good on a lot of stuff, but had an ice cold take on Charlie Hebdo.
Yeah, do you know what that take is?
Yeah, I don't know if ice cold is the best way to describe it. But his take was like, he basically was like, actually, I can pull it up. There's his quote on it is in his like Wikipedia page.
What do you think they mean by ice cold? Do you think they actually just mean like incredibly spicy?
Like yeah, I think so. Okay. Yeah, he says
ice cold.
Yeah, he says, so two despairing and desperate young men act out of their despair and desperation against this political pornography no different than Der Stürmer, who in the midst of all of this death and destruction decide it's somehow noble to degrade, demean, humiliate, and insult the people. I'm sorry, maybe it's very politically incorrect. I have no sympathy for the staff of Charlie Hebdo. Should they have been killed? Of course not. But of course, Streicher shouldn't have been hung. I don't hear that from many people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's, I don't know if ice cold. Yeah, I think I would agree that that's a little bit more spicy than ice cold.
Yeah.
What
yeah,
I
remember
these days?
Oh, sorry, what did you say?
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, I remember, like, when that happened, the Charlie Hebdo stuff, there was a real, like, kind of cultural fervor about it, you know?
Oh, yeah. I remember when that was happening. It was, like, a pretty big deal. I wonder, I feel like, was it mid 2000s or maybe like late 2000s when like the actual thing happened? But yeah, I mean, I think it just like fed into the whole, like, I feel like the talking, the argument at that time. And like, I think this was probably the same era when like Ben Affleck went on Real Time, right? And like talked about Islamophobia. And it was like,
yeah.
Same era, I feel like.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, the atheist. I feel like it was a late atheist era.
Yeah, it was kind of like...
Kind of like the end of that. Kind of when that was fizzling.
The tail end of the new atheist movement, they started being like, hold on, I think Islam's actually the worst one. Let's focus on that. You know?
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's see if this works. Okay, what are you getting, Ethan? Because I'm straight up getting static.
Yeah, I'm getting static.
Okay. So bizarre. We've never had this issue before.
The one time we talk about Israel and the audio gets cut. Interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, let me just
in the chat, yeah. Thanks, Mossad. I like that.
So I take it this is just no better for you.
No.
Okay.
I would actually say maybe worse.
Maybe worse.
Yeah, because I wasn't getting straight up static before.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna try one last thing, and then we're kind of at the end of our rope, and we're gonna have to either watch.
We're gonna have to think of an alternative. Just watch some other stuff. Is there clips that we have?
Yeah. Well, there is actually a plausible alternative that would be sort of in the same neighborhood, but I don't want to do that if I don't have to. So I'm gonna try one last thing.
Okay. Yeah, Luke in the chat saying he's getting the same thing, like buzzing, tiny buzzing. Yeah, so at least it's not just us. Okay, yeah, he's yeah, so Ethan, are you working on any video essays these days? What are you up to?
Yeah, I'm working on it's kind of interesting. I was working on like a few things, but I kind of got sidetracked with the whole Israel-Palestine stuff because like as soon as that started, I was like, oh, well, this is all I'm going to be reading about for like the next few weeks at least, you know. So yeah, I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm usually in a state where I have like 5 different things that are kind of like in progress at the same time, and I'm just like going between them, you know.
Yeah, and did you feel like you educated yourself on the Israel-Palestine thing?
Yeah, I think so. I've been I've definitely learned a lot more about it in like the past week or so. Because I had read a lot about it like years ago, but then it's like when something comes up, it's like, okay, like, you know, like I don't have like an airtight memory, you know.
What do you think of all the online reactions? Like in some ways, I would say the Twitter reactions were like, and my expectations were incredibly low. I would say it was like worse than I expected.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. I mean, Yeah, it's weird. It's interesting because it almost felt like there's been like a while where pretty much whenever a certain issue comes up, you kind of know where everyone's gonna fall on it. But Israel Palestine is interesting because there seems to be a bit more like variance, you know. Like I was interested to see, for example, like where's Vosh gonna land, you know, or like because like there are some people who are like leftists, but like a bit more to the center on like foreign policy, and so it's like, okay, well,
we all knew where Hassan was gonna land.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was incredibly frustrating. I felt like I've never actually wanted to quit Twitter before, but some of the reactions, and I even saw like academics just kind of trivializing, like really kind of like leaning into it being an expression of like decolonization, like what happened, just like leaning into that and like quoting Frantz Fanon, and I was just like, ugh. It's just so. And then obviously that infamous BLM Chicago like picture of the paraglider.
Yeah,
that was insane.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of thing that like the crazy thing about it is just that it should just be so obvious, like, you know, who benefits for this, like that, you know, that like, look, I don't think there's, you know, I don't actually believe any sort of conspiracy about this. I think people are just idiots, but like, but if you were actually being paid by the Mossad to like discredit, you know, Palestinian advocates, this is exactly what you would do.
Oh yeah, it's totally true. It's totally true. Yeah, it was bizarre. Yeah, I was just telling Ethan that like I've never actually wanted to quit Twitter, except I feel like when I saw the reactions to that whole thing happening, and I was like, this is so much worse than I expected.
Yeah, I think our friend Steve Derek Vard actually did quit Twitter over that. But yeah, okay. So I tried to come in on the other browser, but Safari doesn't support StreamYard. But I'm gonna try to. So I'm not sure if it's gonna let me go full screen or not, but I'm gonna try to see if we can do a share from we could, you know, do StreamYard in Chrome and do a share, screen share of the debate on Safari. And I actually do think,
let's see.
Like, yeah, let's see.
Evening for this debate on a very important topic.
It's better.
It's better.
I mean, I hear it. It's really quiet, but like not really quiet. I would say it's quiet.
Okay.
But I could hear it.
Oh,
is there a way of getting the volume up a little bit, or is that maxed?
Let's see. So this is maxed. Maybe though.
In the computer.
There's some. What's that?
Oh, maybe there's something in the computer settings, but I don't know if there's a way of doing it.
It's possible. Let's find out.
Does anyone in the chat know?
Yeah, I know.
Is there any technical experts?
This is like fascinating to watch, but let's let's try this.
That's exactly like Luke has it exactly right in the chat. He's like, it's better, but it sounds like the audio is coming from small laptop speakers. I think that's right. Yeah, play it again. Let me hear.
All right, I just tried one thing. Let's see if this does anything.
Before I sort of make the main point that I would like to make in my own contribution.
Yeah, I can hear it. Yeah,
it's better.
Okay,
it's better.
All right, let's see. Let me just real quick.
Tolerable.
Okay.
Like someone is listening to the debate in the kitchen, and I'm trying to listen from the living room.
Sure. Yeah. Fair enough. Let's see.
It's weird. It's bizarre. Has this ever happened to you, Ben? Or?
Not really. Like there's a range, and like sometimes, and it's a little frustrating because sometimes people think there's like something we can do on this end that we really can't. Right? So there's certainly a range of how good the audio is on the videos we're sharing. And, you know, usually, yeah, I mean, like if you turn the volume all the way up and then use the volume booster extension on Chrome, that's pretty much what you can do. I don't see anything obvious in the
Safari.
Yeah, in the but I am going to
That's not possible. Is it? Someone's asking. It's not that we're just getting the audio through your mic. Like, because is the audio coming? Do you have headphones on right now, Ben?
I don't. Normally, I don't need them when I'm using this setup. But let me. But you know what? Hell with it. Let's experiment. Give me a second.
Yeah. Well, maybe. Yeah. But Luke might be right that we're actually just getting the audio through Ben's mic. But then why would he not be getting echo from our voices? So I don't know. Yeah.
Do you hear that just now?
No. No.
Although actually, I don't know if that. Sorry, that might actually not be a good experiment because because it's still my. Yeah. Sorry, that doesn't make sense. You know what would though? Let's try this.
What? Yeah.
All right. Did you hear that?
No.
Nope. Okay.
So we might have just been getting it through your mic. Maybe Luke's theory is right, and that's why it sounded a little distant.
Yeah, that might be right. Now, the question is, can we do anything about it?
Well, maybe you could just move your mic closer to your computer.
Yeah, push comes to shove. I suppose that is a very God, there's got to be a higher tech solution than this. Why
is there no tech support people at that studio, or is it just kind of like a self-service?
It's pretty much self-service. I mean, like you can get in touch with somebody and you'll hear back in an hour. But let me just see. There's got to be a better way. All right.
And I assume everything's hooked up like it normally is, eh? Like,
yeah, for sure. I mean, this is the
mic's just a USB mic, I guess, that goes into your laptop, and then.
Yeah. I mean, it's like there's like a soundboard here. That's the better experiment that I just tried. Is I turned the volume down all the way on the soundboard. But let's see why. All right. You know what? That's a two-state solution. All right. Let's try the nuclear option here. Close this out. And share screen. This is the backup debate. So let's see how the sound is on this.
Waving Israeli flag.
Oh.
Assuming they support Israel because it's the last frontier.
It's quiet though.
The Muslims.
Yeah, it sounds about the same as the last attempt at the last debate, I think.
Anti-capitalist protesters outside St. Paul's with
that's
better. Be a bit better.
Oh, is this a different debate?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it is. And now we can't hear Ben, but maybe he's muted or maybe he missed.
No, I actually muted myself just to the soundboard just to make sure that you weren't hearing it from my mic.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Okay. So this sounds so yeah, this is the backup. Let me just really quickly here. All right. So yeah, this is the backup. So this is also at the Cambridge Union. This house believes the two-state solution is dead. If we can't find I mean maybe another week if we can find an alternate video for that. There's something we can do, or we can try to do something in advance where we like download it and re-upload it, or something like that. But for this week, I think this is our best option. So yeah, I think we should try this. Let me just
all right
here.
Speak of proposition. is Bassem Eid, an analyst for Israeli TV and radio. Eid is a Palestinian human rights activist. Most recently, he's broadened his research to include human rights violations committed by the Palestinian Authority. Bassem, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, of course, for each of you who attend this event, and thanks for the Cambridge Union Society for inviting me here. Yes, unfortunately, it's dead. And I think that the first one who declared on the death of the two-state solution was the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, just a few months ago, when he said and declared very loudly and proudly that the Oslo Agreement is dead. So if the Oslo Agreement is dead, in my opinion, the two-state solution almost dead. And I want to try to clarify why the two-state solution almost dead. I think that the major failure issue of the Palestinians recently was after the Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in 2005. Since Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip in 2005, what we, the Palestinians, almost did for the Gaza Strip. In my opinion, I think that we, the Palestinians, almost destroyed what remains from the Israeli occupation in the Gaza Strip. And I remember very well, after Sharon declaration on the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, how the Palestinian leaders start running from one TV channel to another TV channel by saying that if Israel will withdraw from Gaza Strip, we are going to make from Gaza Strip Singapore. I never been in Singapore, but I'm wondering if the situation in Singapore right now is like Gaza. I think that that was the most failure test that the Israelis almost put the Palestinians on it. On the other side, I think that since the Oslo Agreement until today, the majority of the Palestinians these days in Gaza Strip and in the West Bank are people who are seeking dignity rather than identity. If you will come today to any ordinary Palestinian in the West Bank and asking him, what are the most three priorities that you are seeking? He will say a job to survive, to ensure and to secure the education system and the health system for my children. Nobody is talking about settlements. Nobody is talking about the wall. Nobody even talking about the foundation of the Palestinian state. And that's giving the impression how people are really fighting right now for their own dignity. Friends, I used to tell my Palestinian colleagues, by the way, I am a person who developed for 33 years in a refugee camp. I used to teach my Palestinian colleagues in the refugee camps that homeland is not the place where you're born. Homeland is the place where you can find dignity, justice, and freedoms. Any country around the world who can assure me these three issues, I have no problem to be considered as their own citizen. If we will look today to the Middle East and how unfortunately the Islamic terror surrounding it, we will find that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is still probably the most safe place in the Middle East. As an Arab, as a Muslim, I don't want to be in Syria. I don't want to be in Iraq. I don't want to be in Libya. I don't want to be in Yemen. It is much more safer for myself and for my children to continue living under the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. On the other side, sometimes I am really feeling so sad when some European countries' leaders is standing up by saying, if Israel is not going to resume the peace negotiations, we are going to recognize the Palestinian state. Which Palestinian state you are going to recognize? A state which is in a lack of infrastructure of state. A state which is in a lack of economic sources of state. A state where is over than 54% of its populations are living in refugee camps. This is not the state that I am looking for. This is not the state that the Palestinians are really dreaming for. I think that the international community is the main reason who made the two-state solution dead. Because the international community must have to recognize one important thing, that a state must have to be built before it's recognized. And I didn't see right now that the international community try to really put any kind of efforts in terms to build the Palestinian state. Unfortunately, since 10 years ago, the two-state solution became a kind of slogan for the international community. It's like a song for the leaders, especially in Europe. Two-state solution. But what your country did towards the two-state solution, in my opinion, just nothing. And this is one of the major problems, that beside the Palestinians and the Israelis, who should have to be accused on the failure of the two-state solution, but also the international community play a very big part in the failure of the two-state solution. Now, if the two-state solution almost dead, what is the alternative? One-state solution is not an alternative. The alternative is that, unfortunately, we, the both sides, the Israelis and the Palestinians, must have to wait probably for 1 or 2 more generations in terms to renew the so-called two-state solution. I didn't see that in the coming 10 years at least, any kind of solution will take place between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Unfortunately, I think that the both societies here are really suffering, probably the Palestinians much more than the Israelis. But in the meantime, I didn't see that our leadership as a Palestinian are really trying to improve our situation. I don't want to talk about Gaza. I don't want to talk about the Hamas. Unfortunately, looks like that since 10 years ago, looks like that the Palestinian leadership are much more supporting the three-state solution for 2 people. Because the Hamas is trying to defend their own Islamic emirate in the Gaza Strip. Abbas is trying to defend his own empire in the West Bank and the state of Israel. This is how we are living in the past 10 years. And looks like that everybody is so satisfied with his own. And that's probably one of the major obstacles for the Palestinians, how we became so divided right now. We are unable to create any kind of unity among ourselves. We are unable to achieve any kind of peace between ourselves. Look, since 2007, we are fighting each other much more than we are fighting Israel, by the way. And this is one of the major problems here. 2 million people in Gaza has been kept in the past 12 years as hostages under the Hamas rule. As hostages. And nobody around the world tried to provide any kind of help in terms to release these 2 million people from a couple hundreds of so-called Hamas leaders. This is one of the major tragedies in the life of the Palestinians. I believe that if we, the Palestinians, will be one day united, probably we will be able to push forward towards any kind of solution in the future. But while we are, the Palestinians, so divided, I don't think that that will help us to reach any kind of peace with the Israelis in the coming, at least, few years. Thank you very much.
You're muted, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, and I am gonna here. All right. So I guess my my thought about this, so we just jumped into this pretty quickly because we were like absurdly far into the stream already, by the time we decided to go to the backup. And I want to make sure that we get in like some kind of half decent amount of it tonight, even though, yes, as you said earlier, it's pretty clearly going to have to be a two-parter, and, I don't know, God willing, we'll eventually figure out a way to watch the other debate.
Yeah.
But this seemed to be, from a quick look around YouTube, just about the closest thing to it that I could find. This came up when I was looking for an alternate video of the original debate. So this is still at the Cambridge Union. It's 3 years later. It's 2018. And the title is This House Believes the Two-State Solution is Dead. So, it's a somewhat similar cluster of topics, at least not too far from what people came to the stream to watch tonight. Although I can already see here, I think something that's often frustrating in these Cambridge Union and Oxford Union debates, which is that the topic is often this sentence that's sort of suggestive, but doesn't really have a thesis in it, like in any real way, right? Like, it's sort of like this one is sort of almost there, right? Because it's like, okay, so what does that actually mean, right? That like, we want a one-state solution, that we just keep the status quo, whatever. Like we watched one on here a while ago from when Megan Day was at the Oxford Union, and that one was much worse as far as the vagueness problem with the resolution. It was, was it this, the American dream has turned into a global nightmare, which is like, that's like poetry. It could mean anything, and that really came out a lot, in the different presentations. But
who comes up with these, eh?
I assume there's like a committee, right, that at Cambridge that comes up with them. But yeah, like, so I think this is not an auspicious start because, you know, like, what was this guy actually arguing for?
I don't know. Like, probably there's not going to be a two-state solution. So let's wait.
yeah, exactly.
And see.
Yeah.
Ethan,
so
I think you're muted, buddy.
I feel like I was like halfway into this guy's statement, still wondering, like, is this guy pro-Israel? Like, what is this deal? Yeah, it was really unclear for a lot of it.
Yeah, that's fair, right? I mean, like, it's still kind of unclear. Having been, you know, now that it's you know, now that it's over, right? You know, I mean, it's like, okay, you know, and I think that, I mean, I'm just trying to find something that I can hang on in this statement, and it seems like, you know, one thing that he said is, well, if the two-state solution isn't happening anytime soon, that just means nothing's happening anytime soon. That, you know, that there's like another generation or two until anything happens, and that seems really untenable, right? Like in some ways, that's kind of the theory behind like the Abraham Accords and under Trump, and behind you know, Biden's, you know, foreign policy before a week ago, right? That that you can essentially, or, you know, for that matter, it's what Mitt Romney said when he was running for president in 2012. That was part of that leaked audio where he said the thing about the 50, you know, the 47% of takers and all that. You know, he said, when it comes to Israel, Palestine, all you can really do as president is just kick the can down the road. And, you know, that's like, again, essentially it's the Abraham Accords move. It's the Biden move with moving forward with the, you know, the Saudi-Israel normalization and all that stuff, which is just kind of like, hey, let's pretend that this piece of it doesn't exist because just nothing's going to happen for a while. And I think whatever else you could say about the last 2 weeks, you know, it seems to become overwhelmingly clear that that's just not tenable, right? You know, that like this is just going to explode if you try to just sort of have the permanent status quo. I mean, this is like, it seems like a lot of the reason for, you know, I mean, obviously there's like a whole cycle of attacks and counterattacks and all that stuff leading up to the stuff weekend before last. And that sort of dramatic and grisly escalation from Hamas, but it also seems like part of what was going on there was just that, like, this sort of grand regional normalization without doing anything about the Palestinians seemed like it was taking away one of the few things that Palestinians had going for them, you know, which was the, however inconsistent it was, like some sort of support from existing Arab states in the region. And so that seems like why Hamas was making the move that they made at the time that they did it. And like now, you know, now that like there's going to be, you know, it sounds like at one point it seemed like they were going to back off from it, but like it seems like they're back to saying, no, there's definitely going to be a ground invasion. Maybe, you know, this could take years, right? You know, that's like this seems like you know, this seems pretty catastrophic, and like, you know, just kind of not having any solution continuing to be the case. I mean, it's like it just seems like maybe much harder than when this guy was saying it to imagine that, like, just, you know, that just lingering on for, you know, a generation or two.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like, I mean, insofar as the proposition of the debate, I mean, certainly what's happened recently makes that proposition less likely, I feel like, or at least more distant, right? A two-state solution. I mean, from what I know about it. And it seems like he was just saying like that's really unlikely. So like, I guess there's two claims. Like, one is that like for anything like a two-state solution to come about, we have to wait a bunch versus like nothing's going to happen. Right. And like, it seems like he was maybe supporting both of those things. Like nothing's going to happen. But that seems clearly wrong. But I don't know if like what happened now makes us any closer to a two-state solution.
No, it certainly doesn't. But like, it's also, you know, I mean, this is like, I think essentially the shape of the problem for quite a while has been that, like, if you could, even if you could, like just somehow magically make it the case that Israel had to, make dramatic concessions or whatever, it just is, like logistically, the two-state solution, which never completely made sense, because it's like there was always this problem about the West Bank and Gaza not actually being geographically connected. So this is a state where, this is not a very big state, that like even if we had a full withdrawal to the pre-1967 borders, this is not a very big state, and it's and the much smaller part of it and the much bigger part of it, wouldn't be geographically connected. So you'd have to like travel through this hostile power to like travel around inside this state, right? So that never made like a lot of sense. And then now you have but like also, kind of over the course of the last few decades, there's been so much more settlement building in the West Bank that it's like, okay, so are you talking about a state where you've are you talking about a state that like has all these big settlement blocks carved out of it, and like and it just seems more like these, I mean, kind of what a lot of critics of the Clinton initiated attempt at a settlement at the late, at the end of the 90s were saying even back then, right? That, you're just talking about even within the West Bank, some like disconnected cantons that are like crisscrossed with Israeli roads that like doesn't really seem like much of a state at all. Or either you're doing that, or like you're mass evacuating, this like giant number of Israeli citizens from the West Bank, right? So then it sort of seems like, in a way, the easier thing to imagine is just, giving everybody citizenship, and, in what is, I mean, I think, to be honest, is in many, many ways has been once, has operated like a single state, for most purposes for a very long time, right? And I think normatively that would obviously be better. I think that would just be a sort of straightforward application of liberal democratic principles that people would accept everywhere else. But if it's hard to imagine Israelis agreeing with, agreeing to a two-state solution, it's even harder to imagine politically how a one-state solution would come about, right? So that's kind of been the problem for a long time, and it's like this. I think this sort of most recent explosion of violence like just kind of makes it such that it's maybe even harder to imagine, in some ways, to imagine either of those things happening, but it also sort of underlies the absurdity of trying to just like kick the can down the road and like hope that you can keep the situation under wraps for God knows how long.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with any of that.
I don't know. Ethan, you have anything else in this, or should we watch the next guy?
Yeah, we can watch the next guy. Yeah, I don't really disagree with anything you said.
Thank you very much, Bassem. We now turn straight to the opposition and welcome Sharon Booth. Sharon is the founder and director of Solutions Not Sides, an educational organization which promotes a non-partisan attitude to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and a respect for the human rights of all. Sharon, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Can I get some water? Thanks very much. Okay, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. And thank you to Bassem for speaking so eloquently first. Is the two-state solution dead? I'm just going to start by defining terms in terms of what I understand by the terms two states in this motion and the word dead. So two states, I'm assuming that we're talking about the 1967 border lines, or what's known as the Green Line, as the basis for a solution. Maybe give or take a few percentage of land swaps here and there, East and West Jerusalem as the respective capitals of the two states. That's what I'm going to understand in this debate, that's what we're talking about with two states. And the term dead, I'm going to understand and take that as being that the two-state solution cannot and will not be implemented at any point ever now, from now moving onwards. And looking at it in that light, I would say maybe Bassam, you use the word renew in a generation or two, referring possibly to a two-state solution. So I would question whether perhaps you ought to be sitting on our side of the panel. But anyway, that's how I'm going to understand it. And that leads me to another question, which is, what is a nation state? So the way I'm going to look at it, I don't know if you know, there's kind of the modernist side of this debate and the primordial side of the debate when it comes to looking at nationhood. I'm going to look at it as being from the modernist side. That's the line that I would take. And I would go straight for Benedict Anderson's idea of imagined communities. I think that nation states are imagined constructs of human beings. I think they have no ontological existence in themselves, and therefore, in that sense, can't be considered alive or dead. Human beings create or uncreate nation states out of their own political will. So it's at that point that I would move on to say, of course, even from a philosophical sense, that the motion is nonsensical. You cannot say that a nation state or a solution in that sense, two states or anything else, is dead. It could be, as Bessem so rightly pointed out, even if improbable at the moment, it could be resurrected. So the problem that I think we really need to highlight here in this chamber today is the fact, and I think maybe it's something we could all agree on, as has been mentioned as well by Bassem, that there is no political will at the moment. There hasn't been, I would say, for at least the past decade. There is no political will, not for two states, not for one state, not for anything else that could be called a viable and realistic solution. I actually think what is happening is that the political leaders involved on both sides, and internationally as well, are playing what you might call the Game of Thrones, the power game. They're using anger and fear as their main tools, and real implementation or even exploration of solutions on the behalf of the needs and interests of Palestinian and Israeli people is not in the equation. It's not as if in the past decade or so, leaders have locked themselves in a room and stayed there until they've come out with a deal, as happened in the Jordan-Israel peace agreement. And if you look at grassroots polls and surveys that have been conducted, if you look at sort of, let's say around a decade ago, you had roughly 70% on both sides that indicated they would be willing to accept at least a two-state solution, even if we're honest, those poll results didn't line up on the details. But at the same time, we haven't had that kind of follow-up from the political leaders to implement that for their people. You've had Netanyahu, the current leader, and he's now a long-serving Israeli prime minister. He has been talking about two states a lot, but he has chosen to form his coalition with far-right parties and religious parties, whose main priority seems to be the promotion of settlement expansion, which of course is a deal breaker for the Palestinians, who see themselves as already having made a historical compromise by accepting what they see as 22% of what, in their eyes, is historical Palestine. You've got Hamas, who at times, when they're politically weak, have paid some lip service to a possibility of a two-state solution. But in reality, they've been playing a zero-sum game, in my view. They have been using tactics of violence, which have not only not liberated Palestine due to the power imbalance in the situation, it also, of course, results in the loss of life for many people, mainly Palestinians. And then you have Abbas, who arguably maybe wants a deal, goes to the UN, bids at the UN, but he's politically weak as a leader. He is very corrupt, and I think also personally benefits from a continuation of the status quo. Meanwhile, what happens? The grassroots lose hope. So if you've seen the most recent poll that was conducted in November and December, the results were published at the end of last month, you will see that support for the two-state solution in both societies is now below 50%. The grassroots lose hope, arguably not because they don't anymore believe in a two-state solution, but they simply can no longer imagine it. It's never going to happen in their sense of hopelessness. And here's where we get to the point maybe of tonight's debate as well, is that, as Bassem has mentioned, the international community, there's no political will here either. It seems that we, internationally, are more interested in using this issue for our own identity politics of whether or not we're right-wing or left-wing politically, and sometimes whether we're Jewish or Muslim. We pick our tribal identities and we choose a side, one against the other. We have the English Defence League out in our streets, waving Israeli flags, claiming they support Israel because it's the last frontier against the Muslims who are coming to establish their caliphate in Europe. We've got the Occupy movement, the anti-capitalist protesters outside St. Paul's with their Palestinian keffiyeh, their Palestinian scarves, their Palestinian flags. We've got so-called Islamists, so-called Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, who are using this issue to recruit for their own cause, their conspiracy theory, which is the counterbalance to the right wing, of course, here, that the war between the West and the Muslims, so-called, is a reality. And finally, of course, at the political level, we've got our party politicians. If you are more centrists in the Labour Party, you're probably going to be in Labour Friends of Israel. If you're more off to the left wing, you're probably going to be in Labour Friends of Palestine. The Conservative Party have a Conservative Friends of Israel. They don't even have a Conservative Friends of Palestine. Liberal Democrats are doing a little bit better. You can look into it. Anyway, even our party political leaders are setting this kind of example for us. And who suffers the most in all of this? Ordinary Palestinian and Israeli people who need a solution. So, how is this actually associated with right and left? If you look at the right wing, what do they particularly concern themselves with? They concern themselves with security, and they concern themselves with national identity. Their main emotion, if you look into emotions in conflict, that they play upon is fear. And of course, when it comes to the Israel-Palestine situation, if you want to preserve national identity and you want to maintain security from an Israeli perspective, then probably your best framework for that would be a two-state solution. Meanwhile, if you look at more kind of the left-wing side of it, if you want to promote the idea that nation-states shouldn't exist at all, then you probably take issue with the idea of a Jewish state of Israel existing, and you may therefore promote a Palestinian state based on the idea that it always was Palestine anyway in that sense, which is a bit of an oxymoron, because Palestine is a national identity too. But you have this kind of tug of war going on between the left and the right, and you may well hear some of the arguments on the panel tonight coming from those perspectives. As I said, it's the people of Israel-Palestine who suffer most in this, and I think, in my view, it's irresponsible, actually, to claim that any solution should be dead. Apart from the philosophical argument that I just made, that it's impossible to say that a human construct that has no life in itself is dead, I think it's actually irresponsible, because rather than contributing to these kinds of divisions, we should be standing up and creating the political will that is necessary for any kind of solution to exist. So I rest my case that if the political will were there to implement one state, two states, or anything else, we all know that it could, in fact, be implemented. And that if we actually care about the people of Israel and Palestine, we will put our energies in that direction. Don't please vote for this side of the motion if you're more pro-Israel, and that side of the motion if you're more pro-Palestine. To be honest, if the motion was that that a one-state solution is impossible, I would be on the opposition for that too. Please vote on the basis that we need to change the culture of this debate in this country, and also feel free to look up Solutions Not Sides and what we do on that line. Thank you.
All right, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little weird, this, like, I don't know, like, one thing I take issue with, I guess, is just there's a lot of talk about, oh, you know, we could have had a two-state solution, but there's just no political will among, you know, the entire world and the international community and all this. And it's like, you know, like, certainly there could, you know, the international community could do more. But, like, if you look at it, I mean, this is a point that, like, Chomsky is fond of making as well, which is like basically the entire international community supports the same two-state solution, a return to the pre-June 1967 borders. And like, there's only two countries that don't accept that two-state solution, and it's like the United States and Israel, you know? So it's like, in terms of like, you know, like I agree with her kind of major thesis that, you know, it's just a matter of, we don't have the political will necessary to implement a two-state solution, but there's nothing like preventing it from happening, like metaphysically or something. It's just a matter of you know, rallying the political will for it. But it's like, you know, the political will in most of the world is basically already rallied, at least to the extent that they're willing to support it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I agree with all that. I mean, I just think that it's her point just seemed to be like a little bit like, oh well, anything could happen if we just like change the political will, and like, I don't know, I guess it's just like, but there's like, without necessarily getting into like a lot of the practical barriers that are like, I guess, related to the politics she was talking about, but I feel like it's more than that, you know, like the settlements, like there's just so many issues like that. I also just don't know enough about to like have an authoritative opinion about them, but it just seems like a real more of a problem than just politics, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, my thing about this, you know, one, I think, yeah, I mean, to Ethan's point and Chomsky's point, I guess, right? Like, I mean, at this point, and granted, this is 2018, so I'm not sure how far along this was then. But, you know, certainly at this point, present tense, I mean, a majority of the countries in the world have actually like extended diplomatic recognition to a so far non-existent state of Palestine. So, you know, that's like, if you're talking about like the world, right, that like literally most of the world is there. As far as a two-state solution goes. I mean, so yeah, I mean, I think that sort of core Chomskyan point that's like, look, clearly the most relevant parts of the world here are Israel, which, let's remember, could literally just unilaterally withdraw at any time, right? And then the United States, which is obviously the most powerful country in the world and gives Israel all sorts of diplomatic, military, financial, you know, rhetorical support, and, you know, and sort of helps Israel be in a position where it feels very little pressure to do that. You know, my big problem with this, like, I mean, the stuff about the English Defense League and all of that was interesting. I mean, I think it's sort of, I don't know, in a way, it seems like she was sort of treating all that as a little bit more mysterious than maybe it is. That like, that, yeah, I mean, there is a reason why, you know, there is a reason why, like, you know, I don't know, like the loyalist murals in Belfast will include Israeli flags along with like sometimes like, you know, if it's like an old enough one, right, you know, apartheid era South African flag, and, you know, maybe a US Confederate flag, you know, that like, there's a kind of self-identification that makes a lot of sense there. And obviously most people who are leftists are going to, you know, support, you know, are going to support, you know, struggles of people who are underfoot. So that makes sense too, as far as it goes. But I feel like she was kind of using that as part of, you know, straw manning of the case for a one-state solution, and also I think kind of straw man in like okay, I don't think it's quite as mysterious as she was saying it is, like what people might mean by dead here. That like, yes, I understand if we're going to play this game, then, you know, then literally speaking, what do you mean? How could it be dead? Sure, fair enough. But I think there are some obvious interpretations that are being disregarded here. Like, that, you know, for example, like, look, here's something you could think that before there were all of these Israeli settlements that, you know, like these like massive Israeli cities on the West Bank full of people, then like there was a way to, you know, that like you might think back then there was a way to sort of to reasonably carry it out, right, without having to do this kind of like mass population transfer. And so, that saying like, well, that's no longer possible. It's no longer possible to do it in a way I would find reasonable, right? Like that's something that somebody could mean by dead. And also, like, again, the thing that seems strawmanniest about this to me was just the description of the case for a one-state solution. Because, like, look, if you're going to say, hey, it's incredibly difficult to even imagine, Israel withdrawing from these territories and allowing a real two-state solution, it's even harder to imagine them, giving up, like sort of giving up the basic premise of the state of Israel by just giving everybody citizenship. And so you'd have like roughly equal numbers of Jewish and Palestinian citizens of the state. So, you just kind of have a realpolitik objection to a one-state solution. I understand that, but I think there's just a much more obvious normative case for a one-state solution than she was really saying there. She was saying, well, people who don't think there should be nation states at all, might think this, but like then also they, what they're thinking of is the state of Palestine, and that actually, see, that's a nation state. So they're contradicting themselves. It's like, well, slow down, right? Like, you have really, I understand that, like, in the context of geopolitics in 2023, this is like radical and extreme, but I think it's sort of not objectively so that, like, this is just a matter of applying principles that lots of people who would oppose this would support in any number of other contexts. That you just, like, all you have to do is just not believe in ethno-states. Just believe that, just believe that in like, okay, sure, maybe nation states are an inevitable form of social organization at this point in human history, but they should be pluralistic nation states. They should be states of all their citizens. That there's no particular right that any ethnic or religious or racial group has to like maintain a permanent majority in any given state, right? That I don't think that like white Christians have a right to like somehow guarantee that there will forever be a white Christian majority in the United States. And so similarly, you could just think like, yeah, there's no particular, I mean, it's like if it just happens to shake out that way, that's fine, but like that's not a good enough reason to violate anybody else's rights. And so similarly, you might think that, given that, the West Bank is treated as part of Israel for every purpose except for giving the Palestinians their equal rights, and the ability to do the things that settlers in the West Bank can do, like vote in Israeli elections and be tried in Israeli civilian courts and all that stuff, then you should just do that. And it just doesn't matter what that means about the ethnic composition of the country, because generally speaking, we don't think that what the ethnic composition of a country is like a important consideration, when considering like how nation states should work and how they should be set up and what rights people should have, and and all that stuff. So I think there's like a very basic bitch kind of liberal universalism that grounds that position, that like she's that I think she's kind of unreasonably disregarded in that presentation. All right, let's watch the next person.
Someone's saying check the news. I don't know what that is.
What?
I don't know. Someone in the chat just said that.
Yes. Well, pulling up the New York Times website, I don't see anything that's particularly new information.
Yeah, neither do I. I'm checking CNN. I don't really see much.
Yeah, I mean, I just see 13 minutes ago, Biden urges U.S. to remain beacon to the world in aiding allies at war. That kind of seems like what we knew he would say. So yeah. Maybe the person in the chat can specify like what news they were thinking of, but otherwise, I think we're good.
Thank you very much, Sharon. We'll now begin our floor speech round. If you'd like to make a speech, please can you put your hand up and say your name and college for the record book. So, Would anyone like to make a speech in proposition of the motion, this House believes the two-state solution is dead? Yes. Thank you.
You said that for you dead means that it cannot happen ever, but I disagree. I think we should regard it as in the foreseeable future. And as you said, in the political climate at the moment, no one has the will. I know specifically on the Israeli side, as you said, Netanyahu and his government are promoting the settlements. And even his possible replacements are his duplicates that repeating his statements. And the identity politics are true also for Israel in the idea of one state or two-state solution. And as you said, Abbas as well has more incentive to continue with this conflict. So unless something is going to fundamentally change, I don't see how is it possible in the foreseeable future. And so I think we're clear.
Thank you. Would anyone like to speak in opposition of the motion? Yes, at the back.
Hello, I'm Nai from Peterhouse. So I am for the opposition of this motion because I'm a very big optimist, and I do believe in humanity and do believe in humankind, and I think we will reach peace at some point if we had the will. I'd like to start by saying that there is one thing that I find missing in on both sides, which is we're talking about this conflict as if it was two tables on an equal level. I think we need to outline that there are powers, there are different levels of powers on each side, and in my opinion, there's an oppressed and an oppressor. And I cannot conceive how Mahmoud Abbas and everyone else on the Palestinian side is not doing any effort, but we are not here to blame in any way all the bombings happening on Gaza or what is happening to Ahid Tamimi or any other Palestinian kids being imprisoned, tortured, not allowed to go to the sea, which is only 30 minutes away from their home country, from their home. So I think, yes, a two-state solution is possible if both of the states put the will in it. However, there is one state, in my opinion, that needs to do a little bit more than that, because I believe today, as an Israeli citizen, you do have quite a lot of rights everywhere you go in the world. Try to be a Palestinian citizen who cannot get a visa to go anywhere, or who has to be humiliated at the borders of Jordan just to go back home or to go visit a friend. So I quite would like to, it is interesting to debate that motion without necessarily being entirely pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli. But I think it is also important to establish the facts that we have today, and it's entirely responsible to say that one state has more power than the other. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Finally, would anybody like to speak in abstention of the motion? Yes, on the bench.
It may have just been me, but sitting there, I felt that actually both of the opening speakers agreed with each other almost entirely, but just defined the motion differently. So for the sake of the rest of the debate, perhaps it would be useful to agree on one definition and then debate that.
Thank you very much. We'll now return to the main debate, and our second speaker for the proposition is Gideon Levy. Gideon is an Israeli journalist and author who writes opinion pieces and weekly columns for Haaretz, which often focus on the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories. Also, if you wouldn't mind speaking from the box, just so Tom can show you when you're over time. But thank you very much, Gideon.
Thank you, Jonah. Thank you. A few years ago, I've been to the, excuse me for mentioning it, in the Oxford Union debate, and I obviously lost. So that's your challenge tonight, to show that you are so much better than Oxford. It will be maybe the first time in my life in which I'll recommend people to turn right and not to turn left. It will be also the last time I'm going to do so. The right-wingers in Israel, they claim that for the sake of the entire Eretz Israel for the sake of maintaining the occupation, it is legitimate to lie. I claim tonight that it is legitimate to come with high fever to protect the one-state solution and to protect justice tonight because I'm very sick. So excuse me if I'll collapse. I ask for your mercy, for your pity, that's all. I would like to claim today that the two-state solution is not dead. The two-state solution was never born. And if you are never born, you can't die. That's the way it goes. There was never, ever an Israeli prime minister or an Israeli statesman in influential position who meant to put an end to the occupation. Never, ever. The whole thing was about lip service, about maintaining the occupation, strengthening the occupation, gaining more time to build more settlements. And how do I know it? You may ask, how do I know that they didn't mean to put an end to the occupation? Very simple. Because they never stopped building settlements. And if you don't stop building settlements, you mean to stay there. Nobody build one terrace in an occupied territory if you don't mean to stay there. And no Israeli prime minister really stopped building settlements, which is a violation of the international law, which is criminal from any point of view. So Israel never meant to put an end to the occupation. Israel never meant to go for the two-state solution, and the two-state solution served as a wonderful lip service for everybody. The Europeans said two-state solution. The Israelis say two-state solution. Benjamin Netanyahu say two-state solution. But not now, some other time. What will be in some other time? We don't know. But now it's not the time. Let's wait. Another generation of Palestinians will live under this brutality of the Israeli occupation, and let's wait. We are not in a hurry, we Israelis. And for the Americans, this was also a wonderful game, to claim that the United States is in favor of the two-state solution and do nothing to put an end to the occupation. Because if there would have been one American president who would really like to put an end to the occupation would have lasted another few months and would come to its end. But there was never also an American president who really wanted to put an end to the occupation. And then came our friend Donald Trump, whom we all like, I guess. He's extremely popular in Israel, the only place on earth. And I must say to his favor, he declared the death of the baby which was not born, but at least he declared the death. He claimed that Jerusalem is off the table. He declared that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel and only the capital of Israel. In other words, there will be no two-state solution. And I'm very grateful to Donald Trump, who at least said the truth and put an end to this masquerade of the world condemning Israel for building settlements, of the EU condemning Israel for building settlements, of Barack Obama condemning Israel for building settlements, and Israel couldn't care less. And Israel could only build and maintain and strengthen the occupation until this stage in which it is irreversible. Between the river, the Jordan River, and the ocean, there are two peoples who live there. There are today, by figures, more or less 50-50. Around 6 million Jews, 6 million Palestinians, obviously including Gaza, including the Israeli citizens who are Palestinians, 6 million and 6 million, more or less. The best solution would have been a two-state solution. Two peoples share one piece of land, let's divide it. The most just division would have been 50-50, more or less. No, Israel would never go for it. The minimum that is on the table is 22% to the Palestinians, 78% to the Jews. Those are the 6-day borders. Those are the 67 borders, the green line. I'm not sure that this is justice, but I wish they would have gone to it. All my life, I believed in a two-state solution. I'm ready now to admit that I'm totally wrong, and if someone will prove me that there is one Israeli statesman who really means to put an end to the occupation, to go for the two-state solution in the minimum lines of the 67 borders without any changes, by the way, because that's really the minimum for a viable state, for a viable Palestinian state, I would step down and say I was wrong. But this doesn't happen. My friends, the one state is there. It is 50 years now. Israel is controlling the occupied territories from within in the West Bank, from without, from outside in Gaza, but it's all a one state. What's the problem about it? The only problem is that it's not a democracy. The only democracy in the Middle East is not a democracy, because in its backyard there is this brutal reality of military occupation for 50 years, of 4.5 million people without any civil rights whatsoever, nothing. So the one state is there, and the struggle should be about its regime. The struggle should be about its democracy. The discourse must be about one person, one vote. Who can say no to one person, one vote? And if you say no to one person, one vote, what does this mean? Is there any other name but apartheid? It looks like apartheid, it walks like apartheid, it is apartheid. Because if you say, that we are the chosen people and therefore we have rights that the Palestinians don't have, you say apartheid. No other definition. So let's challenge Israel. Are you in favor of equal rights? Yes or no? If you say yes, great news. Let's go for a one-state solution. It will be a long process, a painful process. Israel will have to say goodbye to the Zionistic dream, which failed in a way and succeeded in other ways. But if Israel says no, which it will, then we can declare officially the birth of the new apartheid state in the Middle East. Because saying no to equal rights means apartheid. Now, I totally understand those Israeli fellows who dream about a Jewish state, who don't want a binational state. I totally understand it. But you can't have it all. You have to make up your mind. You want a Jewish state, you can't have the occupation. You want the occupation, you can't have a Jewish state. You want the Jewish state and the occupation, you can't be a democracy. You can't have it all. And the world should challenge Israel and ask Israel once and for all, for God's sake, what do you want? You want democracy, you want Jewish state, or you want apartheid? Please choose. But you can't have it all, and you will never have it all. So the one state is there. And people might think that it's a dream and it's a utopia to believe the Jews and Palestinians will be able to live in equality together. But I must tell you that after a few visits in South Africa, with all the problems in South Africa, and I know that South Africa, especially those days, is a very problematic place. But by the end of the day, the unthinkable happened in South Africa. And nobody can deny here that South Africa of today is not a more just place than South Africa 25 years ago. Why? Because South Africa went for one person, one vote, for equal rights forever, for everyone. I got your hint. A very delicate one. So I'm here tonight to tell you that we shouldn't continue this masquerade of claiming that we are going for the two-state solution. You mentioned Benjamin Netanyahu. He was in favor of it only in one speech. He never meant it, obviously. Nobody took him seriously, obviously. I mean, one should be really naive to believe that this man believes that the Palestinians deserve any kind of rights in this part of the world. But so were all the other Israeli prime ministers. They just changed the rhetorics. Shimon Peres spoke about peace. He got the Nobel Peace Prize. And he's the founding father of the settlements. So what kind of two-state solution is it when you build and build? Ehud Barak went to Camp David, offered Arafat the moon, they claim, or the sun. And at the same time, he built 6,000 new settlements. What kind of support of the two-state solution is it when you build behind the back 6,000 more settlements and bring another tens of thousands of settlers who will never leave because they are there to stay. They never had the intention. Sorry? Sure.
Which, you know, is an admirable opinion, that actually that in a way could be the fastest road possible to the implementation of a real two-state solution.
Maybe.
So this two-state solution potentially isn't dead then?
Listen, if the Israelis will be really pushed to the wall and they'll have to chase two-state solution, withdrawing for all the occupied territories, or a one-state solution, and they make the first choice, I will salute to you.
So two states isn't
The
dead?
only thing, no, but the only thing you ignore is the fact, and this will be my last sentence, the only thing you ignore in the occupied territories, there are right now over 700,000 settlers that no Israeli politician will ever be able to evacuate. And without their evacuation, there is no viable Palestinian state. They are there to stay. They are the strongest political group in Israeli society. They are blackmailing one government after the other for decades, and they are the most powerful group in society. And there was never born the Israeli prime minister who could evacuate 700,000 settlers who went there only with one purpose: to prevent any kind of settlement. And they succeeded, and we better realize it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, this guy, you know, I think after the first guy just kind of had some disconnected thoughts about, you know, here's, you know, here are all of my thoughts about the, you know, about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as it stands now. And I'm going to kind of vaguely relate that to the language of the resolution. After the second speaker spent half the time defining terms and making this very narrow literal argument that's you know, I don't know. I mean, it seems like Gideon came here to you know, came here to actually argue about the substance of the point.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting how the, you know, that the woman on the other side kind of piped in, like, okay, so you're saying technically it's possible, like, I don't know. Like, I don't know.
You're saying there's a way.
Yeah.
So you're saying there's a chance.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I don't know. Like, I would be kind of upset to like come to this debate and learn that I was supposed to defend that it's, you know, a two-state solution is like metaphysically impossible or something.
Yeah, which really seems to be how she's interpreting it. Like that there's like no possible world that, you know, that like shares the basic outlines of this one where that could happen. And it's like, okay, is that really what you think anybody's denying though?
Yeah, this guy sounded like he was actually trying to talk about the reality of the situation as best as he could understand it. And yeah, that was refreshing in a way, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, you were saying?
Oh, I was gonna say, like, so I was curious about your take on this, Ben, though, because a friend of mine on Twitter like responded to something. Like, I think we briefly covered what was happening on the Plastic Pills, the other podcast I do.
Yep.
And I had like a friend of mine who describes himself as sort of like a left-wing Zionist, I guess. That's like,
sure,
you know, without getting into what that means. And I remember he was, because I think someone on the podcast, I might have even said it, that like Israel is kind of an apartheid state. And I'm noticing that this guy was kind of pushing that point. And you know, here, this friend of mine on Twitter sort of like pushed back against that. And I don't know, like, in your understanding, like, what's your view on that? Like, can it be defined as an apartheid state? Like, how do you think about it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the case for that is really straightforward, right? That that there is that you know, the West Bank and, I mean, you know, Gaza is a little bit different. I mean, I think Gaza is, you know, as many people have said, is essentially, you know, a kind of prison camp or enclosed refugee camp, more than it is anything else. I mean, this is this small strip of land that people aren't allowed to leave, and they're mostly refugees from earlier ethnic cleansing in other parts of the country. Like 75%, I think, of the Palestinians in Gaza are registered with the United Nations as refugees. But if we're talking about the West Bank, the West Bank is completely integrated into the state of Israel for every single purpose except for one, which is giving the Palestinians their equal rights, right? For that sole purpose, it's considered to be this other thing that's not part of that's not part of the nation of Israel. But for every other purpose, if you're an Israeli settler who lives on the West Bank, you are legally considered to live in Israel, right? There's no sense in which you are treated as living abroad rather than living in Israel. You vote in Israeli elections just like everybody else does. You can run for the Knesset to represent, your West Bank settlement. If you're accused of a crime, you're tried in regular Israeli civilian courts, etc. Whereas if you're a Palestinian living just down the street, none of those things are true of you, right? You can't vote in Israeli elections because you're not a citizen of Israel. If you're accused of a crime, you're tried in a military court rather than Israeli civilian court. And this has been, and this is not some like temporary thing. This is like if you were a Palestinian who was born during the 6 Day War in 1967, I mean, you would, right now you qualify for senior citizen discounts at restaurants, right? Like this has been the entirety of your life has been what I described. And honestly, I think we can just stop right there, and that would be sufficient to say yes, it's an apartheid state, right? That the treatment of Palestinians, the West Bank, is actually in many ways worse, actually, than the original apartheid in South Africa. But I mean, just in the sense that people of different ethnicities living side by side have radically different rights. Because of that, then yeah, I think it's straightforwardly apartheid. And I think that I think you could like if you tried to say no, this is more like other situations where some country we wouldn't consider an apartheid state for some period of time, militarily occupies some other country somewhere else. I'd say one, that would really be ignoring just how long term this is. And the fact that, as Gideon Levy just said, you don't build settlements if you ever intend to leave. That's the whole point of a settlement is to make it harder to ever leave. And two, again, I think it really when the United States was occupying Afghanistan, there was no sense in which an American who American in Afghanistan was considered to be living in the United States, right? This is this was not in any way really claimed as American territory, right? Whereas again, the West Bank is, for all but one purpose, totally integrated into the state of Israel. So I'd say that alone would make it an apartheid state. It's true that there are it's true that if you are a Palestinian whose family, escaped the ethnic cleansing in 1948 and who ended up on the right side of the Israeli side of the Green Line after the war, then you eventually got Israeli citizenship, although that took a lot longer than what a lot of people think, right? Like the entire, at the time they would have said Israeli Arab population was under martial law for the first, between 1948 and 1967. But but you more or less have equal rights after that. Although even there, it's you could vote in Israeli elections. Yeah, you're tried in Israeli civilian courts if you're accused of a crime. But also, this is a country where, it's a little bit more complicated now within the last, very recently, they finally changed this a little bit. But like for the vast majority of the history of the state, everybody had to carry an ID card that said that said Jewish or Arab on it, right? As well as your citizenship. And that's like, if you imagine making people carry ID cards that say either black or white on them just to make sure nobody's passing, right? That sounds awfully apartheidy. And now my understanding is they sort of changed it, but in a weird way where it's like, it doesn't directly have that information anymore, but like it has other information that's like very easy to infer that from on it. But in any case, and certainly if you are, the fact that that if you are I come from a mixed background. I don't think I could, but like my dad, right, I think could move to Israel tomorrow and get Israeli citizenship. And if you were a victim of the ethnic cleansing in 1948, you're still not allowed to come back, right? Or your family still isn't allowed to come back. And in fact, there are all of these incredibly creepy laws, like if you an Israeli citizen marries a Palestinian on the West Bank, that's like they've written it into the law now to specify that doesn't mean that person then gets to gets residency in Israel, because they're so keen to prevent that. And it's like so I think there are a lot of like very apartheidy things beyond the sort of
ethno-statey things, of course.
Yeah, very, very ethno-statey things beyond that sort of core fact about the West Bank. But I think even if you put aside the last couple of minutes of everything I said and just had that basic core fact that if you are a Israeli settler on the West Bank, you have all these rights that if you are a Palestinian on the West Bank, you don't have, and it's been integrated into the state in all of these ways. But, except for giving Palestinians equal rights, I think just that core fact, I would argue, would be more than enough to justify the apartheid description.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking, although I think I know less about it than you do. So I think when he kind of, pushed back on me, I was like, oh, well, maybe like I'm wrong. So I appreciate you. Like, I think you kind of said the things that I expected you to say. I mean, without outing this person, I think like their main retort was sort of like, and, to be fair to him, like, I think it was an emotional time. Like the stuff was a bit more fresh. And I think he heard it and was just like, but he said, I think his main retort was like, well, I guess apartheid is when there are Israeli, Arab, Palestinians working in Israeli civil society, university professors, doctors, and other professionals. There are Arab members of the Knesset, and on and on. And then he just says, well, Israel is an occupying force, of course, but he just wanted to resist apartheid for those reasons. And I don't know.
Yeah, I would just, again, I just think that it's, I mean, I'm always so confused about why people bring up doctors when they make that point. It's like, I'm pretty sure there were black doctors in apartheid South Africa, actually, right? I mean, somebody please fact check me about that if I'm wrong, but it would be extremely unsurprising if that were true. So I'm always weirded out when I see that on the list, right? I mean, there were definitely black doctors in the American South, like at the high point of Jim Crow, when when zero black people were allowed to vote, essentially, right? Or almost none, right? Like, it's very unusual, I think, for there to be oppressed groups where like nobody's allowed to be a doctor. So the fact that they even have to put that on the list always strikes me as pretty suspect. But it's like, look, it is true that there are some Palestinians, depending on where your family ended up in 1948, who have a lot of the rights of Israeli Jewish citizens. Not all of them, right? But a lot of them. That's true. But
wait, is it possible for a Palestinian who's like maybe fully Israeli to have all the exact same rights?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the sort of the things I'm thinking of is like rights that they wouldn't have, are like like that example I just mentioned about like family unification, stuff like that. But it's like, yeah, like there are essentially, but yes, there are certainly Palestinian citizens of Israel. If your family ended up on the Israeli side of the Green Line at the right time, that's true. but I just don't buy the move from that to, oh, therefore this is just like any other situation where Israel is just an occupying power, not an apartheid state, because I think that basically disappears the sort of reality of the West Bank being so much a part of the country in so many ways, and having all these Israeli citizens permanently living in cities that, you know, again, have representation in the Knesset, etc. And the Palestinians who live alongside them in the same areas, you know, not having those same rights. I mean, I think that sort of saying, oh, see, you know, we gave citizenship to some of them, therefore, what are you talking about? Like, that's just kind of like, I don't know, man. There's like, I mean, that, you know, I know it's not a one-to-one. I know this is an exaggeration, but it's like, that feels a little bit to me like, say, it's like, well, you know, come on now. There were like, you know, not every, you know, black person in the American South before 1861 was a slave. There were free black people in the South, right? Like, which is true. Right. Yeah. It is true. There were, right. But that doesn't, you know, that doesn't like negate the sort of, you know, I think that anyway, I guess I'm repeating myself here, but you know, I find that very uncompelling.
Cool. I mean, thanks for answering that question very extensively, because I wasn't sure. Like I said, I sometimes feel like my knowledge of this is a little bit limited. So like, I know you've spent probably way more time reading about the details of this. This is like one of those issues that I always like, I just know it's so complicated, and I just feel like I resist looking too deeply into it. I feel kind of the similar, I mean, up here in Canada, it's like the Indigenous issue is kind of, I almost feel like similar in that sense, where I'm just like, oh God, I don't want to get into the weeds of that.
No, I
mean, oh, sorry,
yeah. No, you were saying.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, you know, this is kind of an aside, but like, you know, I actually think that in terms of like, you know, like it certainly, if you want to know like the whole history of Israel, Palestine, it's like very complicated. But I actually think that like, you know, in terms of like this basic normative question, I think that it's actually settled by like some pretty straightforward details, which was like, you know, like circa 1967, Israel launched like a preemptive war that was like totally unprovoked, occupied a bunch of territories, subsequently put the people living in those territories under like an apartheid regime. And then like, you know, throughout the history of the conflict, various, you know, parties, various Palestinian parties like the PLO, and then even Hamas, although Hamas has more like signaled it than said it outright, have like basically asked for a solution that's like in line with international law and that's supported by basically the entire world, which is, hey, how about you give us back the land that you took in that unprovoked war in 1967? And Israel has basically continually said, no, we're going to continue the occupation instead. And really, I think that's kind of, in broad strokes, that's really like all you need in terms of painting the picture of like who's the aggressor here, who's like the oppressor, etc.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that, except maybe the word unprovoked. And this might seem pedantic, but I would just say, like, I would agree with unjustified, right? Like in other words, you know, unprovoked to me makes it sound like it just kind of came out of nowhere, and not that there was this whole sort of process of like, you know, escalation leading up to, you know, out, like this is something that comes up with like Russia, Ukraine, right? That that this sort of this distinction, right? You know, so maybe, you know, maybe I'm being like that second speaker. I'm being too hung up on the literal meanings of words, right? You know, but like, you know, but yeah, I mean, I think certainly it was, you know, Israel's the one initiating the actual fighting, right? Like they're the, you know, they're the ones doing, you know, whatever word you want to apply to like Russia going into Ukraine, right? Like that's, you know, Israel's doing that in 1967. They're the ones who start shooting, right? So that's absolutely true. And, you know, and I don't think that makes a difference to the rest of what you said. I mean, I think that's all, you know, I think that's all correct, right? You know, it's like, yeah, I think the history matters. You know, I mean, I think the history matters in the sense that, like, there's this very frustrating thing, certainly when people talk about like the most recent events as if they just came out of nowhere, right? Like, as if like the, you know, relevant cycle of violence here started Saturday before last. And that's obviously very grating. And certainly the history matters insofar as like you have specific things like, oh, you have people who were, you know, who had to flee from Israeli war crimes in 1948. And like now they're like grandchildren aren't even allowed to visit Israel. Like that's certainly important, but also, you know, there's a certain sense in which, yeah, I mean, I think I agree with the thrust of your comment that it's like, you don't want to get too hung up on that. Cause it's like, in a sense, it doesn't really matter. It's like, if you just did it like some, you know, juvenile thought experiment where like the world was created, 10 seconds ago with, complete with everybody's, false memories of stuff before that and all of that. Right. Then like, okay, it would still be the case that there are these people who are being kept in this totally ridiculous situation where they don't have an independent state and they don't have rights within the Israeli state. And like, you can't do that, like, regardless of like what the sequence of events that led up to it is, right. Which is, I mean, I think maybe just an important point, if only because like so much of the discussion about this stuff ends up like being about like whose ancestors were doing what when. It's like, that literally doesn't matter. That's like nobody's human rights should depend on that.
Yeah. And to be clear, like, yeah, I mean, I guess like the only point in like bringing it up is just like, and I guess what I mean when I call it like unprovoked is like, there was a process of escalation. I would argue that in terms of who did more to de-escalate, it was, Egypt and Jordan, but
sure.
But I would say, like, there's like this very common thing people will say where it's like, oh man, there was like an imminent attack from Egypt and Jordan, and Israel was basically doing this preemptively to defend themselves. And, it's like, it turns out that's like just, that's something that like Israeli officials will say to the public, and then like verifiably in their journals and in private meetings, they're like, nah, LOL, that's not at all what we thought was going to happen. And, I think that's I feel like a lot of people have this conception. I remember like, God, this made me so angry. Like, I remember Destiny saying something like this, where he's basically like, yeah, we should do like an ethnic cleansing because it's like a fuck around and find out situation, because the Arabs were about to attack Israel and Israel had to defend itself. And so now they should just push all the Arabs out. And it's like, well, besides the normative irrelevance, which I totally agree with you on, it's like just not true. Like, it's just a total revision of history.
And that's also crazy. I mean, that's what we were talking about with Katie Halper on Monday night. It's like this, like, it's not even like, it's bad enough to talk as if there's like a Palestinian hive mind and like every single Palestinian, is sort of in on every decision that's made by, any Palestinian faction. But it's like, the Arab hive mind is just totally crazy. Like you're like every single, like that the stateless Palestinian population is responsible for decisions that were actually, or in this case, not actually made by just any state where the language is Arabic, right? Like that's all the Arabs means in that sentence. It's like, there are a bunch of those, right? Like, it's like, no, let's just treat them all as this weird ethnic hive mind that, that's like, it's like, yeah, no, that's just the Arabs, and like whatever the Arabs do, the Arabs are responsible for. The Arabs fucked around and found out. It's like, man, if you have a, this is, not at all original point, but I mean, like, this is the moral reasoning of Al Qaeda right now, that it's like, oh, look at what the West did. So, therefore we can do anything in response to, to like any group of like Western civilians.
Yeah.
All right.
No, and it's interesting too, because like, a lot of people who are kind of on the more pro-Israeli side will try to have it both ways, where they'll be like, no, like they didn't, I've seen this on Twitter, people arguing about that map of like, Palestinian land shrinking over time. And people are like, no, like Israel didn't, in 67, Israel didn't take that land from Palestine. They took it from like Egypt and Jordan. And then like in other cases, they'll be like, yeah, like Palestinians should suffer because Egypt and Jordan were going to attack, Israel in 67. Just kind of strange.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking that phrase "fuck around and find out." It's like that just is so many people use it to say so many different kinds of stupid things.
Yeah.
Like,
True.
I've just never. I don't think I've ever heard anybody use that combination of words to say anything that wasn't asinine. But all right, let's so I know we're at the time we normally go to the post game, but you want to watch just a little bit more here, and then we do have a hard out, but we'll just do like a little bit of a shorter post game, I guess.
Thank you very much. We now move to the opposition and welcome Norman Finkelstein, American political scientist, activist, author, and professor. Finkelstein has conducted.
Oh, this makes me so happy. I was actually afraid that he wasn't going to be in this one.
I find it funny that he's on it's just so funny, like both sides. It seems like the pro-Palestine, pro-Israel, pro-Palestine is just like completely scattered across like both sides of this debate.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Did extensive research on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and on the Holocaust. Norman, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, even in Gideon Levy's alleged illness, he has considerably more rhetorical force than I do. However, I do not believe that if the argument is carefully reasoned and we try to set aside our emotions and passions, that the argument he makes is persuasive. I'm going to try to lay out my argument in 5 theses, which sum up, epitomize my point of view. Number 1, historical circumstances constrain political choices. Men make their own history, Karl Marx famously said, but they do not make it as they please. They do not make it under self-selected circumstances, but under circumstances existing already, given and transmitted from the past. The tradition of all dead generations weighs like a nightmare on the brains of the living. When it comes to the Israel-Palestine conflict, the question often put is, do you support one state or two? But that question is beside the point. The only pertinent question is, what is politically feasible under existing circumstances? 2, just because a solution is objectively rational or morally desirable does not make it politically feasible. Consider immigration. 1 in 10 US citizens is of Mexican descent. Millions of undocumented Mexican workers currently live in the US, while hundreds of Mexicans desperately seeking employment in the US are killed each year along the border. The Mexican economy depends on $20 billion in remittances annually from Mexicans laboring in the US. and 1/2 of the US was stolen from Mexico. The rational and moral solution would obviously be to abolish the border between Mexico and the US. But politically, it is a pipe dream. It is impossible to muster the political will to effect a, so to speak, one-state solution to Mexican immigration. The defenders of immigrant rights must operate within the less than perfect framework of immigration reform. Then there is the time factor. Even if it could be demonstrated that a one-state solution in Israel-Palestine was materially inevitable and morally superior, that still would not make it politically feasible anytime soon. Immanuel Kant speculated back in the 18th century that amidst the chaos and conflict racking Europe, a rational plan was at work, inexorably propelling humanity towards a federation of states and the abolition of war. His prediction proved to be prophetic, but it took more than 200 years of death and destruction, evolution and revolution, advance and retreat before the European Union came into being. 3, a political solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict requires international pressure on Israel. Although the struggle for Palestinian rights must be initiated by the Palestinians themselves, they cannot succeed on their own. Israel will not budge unless the international community compels it. The international consensus at the state level has for decades overwhelmingly supported 2 states. This past year, the annual UN General Assembly resolution, Peaceful Settlement of the Question of Palestine, that calls for 2 states on the June 1967 borders, it garnered 157 votes and only 7 votes against. True, these are paper resolutions, but then think logically. Surely states will sooner come to act on what they formally support, 2 states, than on what they don't support, dismantling Israel. The 2-state consensus at the level of popular opinion is no less overwhelming. Consider, because Mr. Levy, or Gideon, he's a friend, is a person of the left, so let's look at his camp. Consider just the left end of the political spectrum. Whereas both Jeremy Corbyn in the UK and Bernie Sanders in the US have registered strong support for Palestinian rights, they have also emphatically affirmed Israel's statehood. In the wake of the Nazi Holocaust, and compounded by Israel's effective exploitation and manipulation of it, the legitimacy of a Jewish state, albeit undefined, has become deeply entrenched in public opinion. To paraphrase Marx, the nightmare of a dead generation weighs heavily on the consciousness and conscience of the living. It is improbable that a political agenda entailing the coercive dissolution of Israel will gain traction, whereas the vision of a single democratic state is morally compelling. A Jewish refuge in the aftermath of the Nazi genocide carries surpassing moral power. Now, Gideon mentioned the precedent of South Africa, but the notion of a white state did not command legitimacy after World War II. Quite the contrary. So international public opinion eventually swung behind a one-state solution in South Africa. In the court of public opinion, the legitimacy of a Jewish refuge state stands poles apart from the legitimacy of a white supremacist state. The apartheid precedent thus lacks political resonance or relevance. 4, material facts on the ground, such as illegal Jewish colonies, constitute a political impediment, but they do not preclude a two-state solution. The degree to which the 600,000 illegal Israeli settlers in the West Bank prevent the creation of a Palestinian state is in the first place technical in nature. The facts are authoritatively presented by Jan de Jong in a forthcoming volume edited by Jamie Stern Weiner. It is often imagined that the West Bank has been entirely overrun with Israeli settlers. In fact, a majority of the settlers are concentrated in several clusters. These settlements encroach, in fact, on about 5% of the occupied Palestinian territories. If a future Palestinian state is to be spatially contiguous and socioeconomically viable, it would require the evacuation of Jewish settlers from all but 2% of the West Bank plus a 2% land swap with Israel. In such an eventuality, some 250,000 illegal Israeli settlers would have to be uprooted. Even as this is a formidable obstacle to overcome, dismantling the settlements and relocating the settlers still remains, as Palestinian political analyst Mouin Rabbani put it, a question of politics, not physics. Now, there's no question that it is a formidable obstacle, the settlements. However, the pertinent question in terms of tonight's resolution is this: Are Israelis more likely to relinquish the Jewish settlements or relinquish the Jewish state? In other words, if the two-state solution is dead, then a one-state solution must also be dead. 5, declaring the two-state solution is dead is music to Israel's ears. To oppose tonight's resolution does not make one a Zionist, whatever that means, let alone a racist or apologist for Israel's crimes. Indeed, it is this speaker's considered opinion that Israel is guilty of grave crimes against humanity and must be held accountable for them. Indeed, as we speak, as we meet tonight, Israel is deliberately poisoning 1 million Palestinian children living in Gaza as they're forced to drink water that's not fit for human consumption. However, if I oppose the resolution, it is because the resolution is not only politically false, but politically irresponsible. It does no service to the Palestinian people to put forth slogans that, however idealistic, will alienate public opinion. Israel forever pretends that it faces an existential threat as its enemies want to destroy the quote-unquote only Jewish state. It is music to Israel's ears when Palestine supporters declare the two-state solution is dead and advocate instead Israel's dissolution in a unitary state where Jews are reduced to a minority. Israel can then plausibly claim it has no choice except to dig in its heels. Isn't it truer to the facts and politically wiser to proclaim that only Israeli recalcitrance stands in the way of a fair and equitable solution based on two states? Thank you.
All right. So quick comments on that before we go to the post game.
Yeah, I thought that that was probably my favorite statement of the night. I mean, it seemed pretty clear. I agree with most of what he said. Basically, like, yeah, I mean, you can argue that you can argue that a two-state solution is dead, but if a two-state solution is like more viable than basically any other alternative, like where does it get us to say a two-state solution is dead? It seems like the right thing to do. It's like, okay, if all of the viable solutions have a really low probability of working, let's just take the highest low probability solution and put our weight behind that. But yeah.
Yeah, Victor?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't really have much to add beyond that, but I was happy to see that Norm was in fact here. So
yeah, exactly. It's a nice surprise. They I was thinking we'd have to change the thumbnail after we were done streaming. Since then,
but it all worked out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that I saw somebody in the chat say this should have been a debate just between Norm and Gideon, and I, certainly, I mean, which in a way is kind of a funny debate because there's this sort of obvious political sense, just kind of what Ethan said earlier, in which they're sort of on the same side, but that they're both, very passionately pro the Palestinian cause, Jewish people, but obviously they're disagreeing about the one state versus two state solution. And I think they're both making probably the best cases for each of those. I'm very curious about how Norm's thinking about this, has stayed the same or changed in the last 5 years. Should ask him about that. But in any case, yeah, look, it's always, maybe over email, although it's always fun to talk to Norm on the phone, and then if you don't get him, I think he has an actual answering machine. But in any case, yeah, look, I think, I think that he gave the most serious defense of the two-state solution, certainly that anybody has so far tonight. I think he kind of, because I think it's a defense that acknowledges the obvious normative attractiveness from the perspective of liberal democratic values of a one-state solution. I'm kind of still mulling what else to say about it, but we should go for it's going to be a short one, but we should go to the post game for patrons. So when we open that up, I'll give my case for I'm going to bite Norm's bullet. I'll give my case for a one-state solution to the United States-Mexico conflict. But in any case, as a recent resident of Mexico, I feel like I'm well positioned to make this case. But in any case, so we are going to go for a brief post game. I think it's only going to be about half an hour, which means that we are not going to finish the entirety of this. We are going to have to figure out another time to do that. But we are going to do that now. So if you are already a patron, you should already have that link to the post game. If you are not, there's really no time like the present. Patreon.com/Ben Burgis. $5 a month, get the exclusive post games every Monday and Thursday night, access to the Discord server, exclusive access to various things, etc., but mostly our love and gratitude for keeping this going. Also, again, final plug for the debate on Sunday. Information is in the description for the stream. And with that, we're going to go to the post game. We should be able to start up in like the next 2 minutes. Left is best.